Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine trying to capture a moving target, someone whose very existence is, well, it's a debate among their closest followers. That's Socrates for you. He's arguably the most famous philosopher, right? Yet pinning down the historical man, the actual person, it feels less like historical research and more like, I don't know, chasing
It
shadows.
really does. It's quite a challenge.
We're talking about a figure so foundational to Western thought. I mean, his name is basically synonymous with wisdom. Yet so much of what we know about him comes from the pens of others, and sometimes they give us wildly different, even contradictory interpretations. It's a fascinating puzzle.
It truly is. And what's fascinating here is precisely that uncertainty around Socrates himself.
Hmm.
We're not dealing with his own writings simply because he left none, zero. Instead, we're grappling with multiple, sometimes conflicting, viewpoints from his own contemporaries. Most notably, you've got his students, Xenophon and Plato, and then there's his critic, the playwright Aristophanes. So our mission today, our deep dive, is really to get into these primary accounts, sift through them, try to extract the most important nuggets of knowledge, and explore not just who Socrates was, but maybe why he remains such a compelling, such an impactful, and yet, elusive figure in Western thought. We'll look at some surprising facts, hopefully with enough humor to keep you hooked on this journey, trying to distinguish between what we can reasonably conclude and what remains, well, open to interpretation.
Okay, so where are we getting our info for this dive?
Right, good question. We're drawing primarily from a comprehensive history of Western philosophy. This work has done an excellent job of distilling insights from those key ancient texts like Plato's Apology or Xenophon's Memorabilia. But this means we're already dealing with layers of interpretation, right?
Oh,
Which makes the task of reconstructing the historical Socrates quite the intellectual challenge for us today.
it certainly sounds like it. It's almost like trying to understand a legendary musician only through like album reviews written by their most devoted fans and their harshest critics, but never actually hearing the music directly. You
Yeah.
get the essence, maybe, but you're always left wondering about the true sound, you
Yeah,
know?
that's a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it sets the stage perfectly for our first task, trying to sketch the man behind the myth.
Right. So when we talk about Socrates, we immediately hit this core historical problem.
Yeah.
He never wrote anything down himself. This fact alone makes him an incredibly difficult subject for any historian. All our knowledge, every single detail, comes filtered through what others wrote about him.
Which isn't totally unusual for ancient figures, of course.
True, but the problem here is compounded because these accounts, mainly from Xenophon, Plato, and Aristophanes, they just don't always line up. He was clearly a very well-known figure in Athens, no doubt about that. He was even famously caricatured in Aristophanes' comedy, The Clouds.
Decades before his trial, even.
Right. But what exactly he was known for, how he lived day to day, that's often disputed among these very sources. It makes him just a really complex figure to pin down.
It really does.
So, given that contradiction, how do historians even begin? How do you start to reconstruct a reliable picture? What are the biggest, say, disagreements between Plato and Xenophon on his daily life, or maybe his personality?
Ah, that's where the real detective work comes in. It's fascinating. Xenophon, for instance, he tends to portray Socrates as a much more, let's say, conventional figure. Practical, almost a moralizer sometimes, someone concerned with everyday virtues, practical conduct. His Socrates often sounds quite didactic, straightforward.
And Plato.
Plato, on the other hand, especially as you get into his later dialogues, uses Socrates as a vehicle for much more abstract, theoretical, sometimes even mystical, philosophical ideas. He becomes often a mouthpiece for Plato's own evolving, complex metaphysical theories. It's less about the historical man, maybe, and more about the philosophical ideal.
And Aristophanes, just making fun of him.
Well, yeah, as a comic playwright, he presents Socrates as this absurd, head-in-the-clouds intellectual. He satirizes him, often lumping him in with the sophists, which Socrates himself would have hated. So you see, it's not just different details we're dealing with, it's fundamentally different essences of the man, different portraits entirely.
Wow. So what can we agree on? Is there anything solid?
Well, what we do generally agree on, historically speaking, is his lifespan. He was born around 469 BC and executed in 399 BC. That 70-year span ending in such a dramatic way, that's perhaps the one relatively undisputed fact about his personal timeline. It at least anchors his existence in time.
So we have this universally recognized name, this icon, but when you try to actually grasp him, he sort of dissolves into these different versions depending on who's telling the story, which honestly just makes him even more intriguing, doesn't it?
Precisely. That elusiveness is part of his enduring appeal, I think.
Hmm.
And while the precise details of his life can be murky, the sources largely agree on his unconventional nature. He was an Athenian citizen, yes, but of modest means,
Hmm.
definitely not wealthy, and he apparently spent his entire life in constant disputation.
Disputation, like arguing.
More like engaging in philosophical conversation, dialogue wherever he went. This wasn't just a casual hobby for him, it was his life's work, his mission, and crucially, he taught philosophy, especially to the young, and this is a big, but he did not do it for money.
Ah, unlike the sophists.
Exactly. This sets him apart dramatically from the sophists of his day. They were these highly renowned, often traveling teachers who specialized in rhetoric, persuasion, and they charged hefty fees. Socrates' refusal to accept payment, well, it speaks volumes about his core values and his method. It signals that his pursuit was for truth, for understanding, not for profit.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me. This
Yeah.
wasn't some ivory tower academic, tucked away in a library. We're talking about an Athenian citizen who quite literally fought in battles, endured harsh winters barefoot, and somehow made dense philosophical topics interesting by just talking to anyone he met.
Mm-hmm. Xenophon's accounts really paint that vivid picture of a man deeply engaged with the everyday life of Athens. He wasn't sequestered in elite circles. He'd wander through the agora, the marketplace, and strike up conversations with anyone, carpenters, coppersmiths, shoemakers.
Anyone.
And what would he talk about with a shoemaker? How to make better shoes. Well, maybe starting there. But he wouldn't just ask how they built a strong roof or stitched a good shoe. He'd subtly shift the conversation to what makes a good craftsman in the first place. And then from there, maybe pivot to the bigger question. What makes a good man? He connected that practical skill, that techne, to moral virtue, or rento.
Ah, I see. So it wasn't just idle curiosity. That was his philosophical method in action, showing how wisdom and virtue could be found even in the practical arts, not just in abstract debates among intellectuals.
Precisely. And this profound intellectual engagement was coupled with this remarkable physical endurance that honestly bordered on the legendary. Xenophon, in works like the Symposium and Memorabilia, describes Socrates serving as a hoplite, that's a heavily armed foot soldier in at least 3 major battles during the Peloponnesian War: Potidæa, Delium, Amphipolis.
Wow, a philosopher soldier.
Indeed. And there's that famous anecdote from Potidæa, which Plato recounts in the Symposium. Apparently, Socrates stood in one spot for an entire day and night, just deep in thought, barely moving, oblivious to everything around him.
A whole day and night, just standing there.
According to the story, yes. He was also known for its incredible capacity to endure cold, hunger, thirst. He famously went barefoot, even in winter. Shabby clothes. So much so that people apparently wondered if he was immune to cold or, had some secret stash of warm cloaks somewhere. He literally marched barefoot on ice during military campaigns.
Okay, so definitely not the kind of philosopher you'd expect to see, like on the cover of a Wisdom Monthly magazine today.
Not quite.
But I imagine that unconventional appearance and lifestyle actually became part of his brand, right? Cementing his image as someone who truly lived by his own values, independent of what society thought.
I think that's very likely true. It made him stand out.
And this leads us neatly to one of the most famous stories about him, the Oracle of Delphi. Tell us about that.
Yes, the Oracle of Delphi. This story is absolutely central to understanding Socrates' mission, his purpose. It's recounted very powerfully in Plato's Apology. Apparently, his friend Chaerephon, who sounds like a rather impetuous character, traveled to the Oracle at Delphi. This was the most prestigious religious authority in the whole Greek world. And Chaerephon boldly asks the oracle's priestess whether anyone was wiser than Socrates.
And the Oracle said?
The oracle replied, quite definitively, that no one was wiser.
Wow. So how did Socrates react to being declared the wisest man alive?
He was utterly perplexed, dismayed even, because he genuinely believed he knew nothing of real importance, nothing truly significant. He felt this pronouncement couldn't be literally true. It must be a riddle, he thought, a challenge from the god Apollo.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this raises a truly profound question, doesn't it? What does it actually mean to be wise? Socrates' answer, the one he derives from the oracle, it fundamentally challenges our common definition of expertise. It suggests true knowledge starts not with accumulating facts, but with humility, with recognizing what you don't know.
Precisely.
It's almost ironic, isn't it? The wisest man turns out to be the one who knows just how much he doesn't know.
It turns the whole idea on its head.
Especially today, in our age of information overload, where everyone seems to claim expertise about everything, Socrates' insight feels incredibly potent. That genuine expertise often begins with the humility to admit what you don't know, and maybe the willingness to question what you think you do know.
It's exactly right. And driven by this, what he saw as a divine mission to understand the oracle's meaning, Socrates went about Athens systematically. He started questioning those people with reputations for wisdom, politicians, poets, artisans, craftsmen. He had engaged them in conversation, probing their claims to knowledge, asking them fundamental questions about their fields and about life.
And what did he find? Did he find the wise people?
Well, what he consistently found was that these individuals, who were believed by many and often believed themselves to be wise, were not truly wise at all. Not in the deepest sense. Politicians, for example, might be skilled at rhetoric or, running the city day to day. But when he pressed them, they couldn't really articulate the true nature of justice or the good life or piety.
And the poets.
The poets, he observed, might create beautiful verses, inspired works, but they seemed to do so by a sort of genius and inspiration, as he put it, not by genuine wisdom or understanding. And because they were good at poetry, they'd often imagine they were wise about everything else too, which they clearly weren't.
And the craftsmen, the artisans.
The artisans certainly knew their crafts. Well, they could build things, make things, but they often made the same mistake. Assuming their expertise in one narrow area meant they had wisdom in other much more important areas of life where they actually had none.
And I imagine, predictably, this made them incredibly angry.
Oh, absolutely. Imagine someone constantly poking holes in your self-perception, especially if your public reputation depends on appearing wise and knowledgeable.
Yeah, that wouldn't go over well.
He says himself in the Apology something like, "I found that the man was not wise, and I tried to explain this to him, kindly but firmly. He genuinely believed he was doing them a service, helping them see their own limitations, encouraging self-knowledge."
But of course, that's not how they saw it.
Not at all. This generated, in his words, enmities and calumnies against him. Lots of resentment, lots of bad-mouthing. He eventually concluded, he says, that God only is wise, and that human wisdom is worth little or nothing. He wasn't claiming he was wise, just that he was aware of his lack of wisdom, unlike others. He saw himself as a kind of divine gift to Athens, constantly urging people to care about virtue and truth above everything else, wealth, status, reputation.
But his relentless questioning, even if it was aimed at truth and self-improvement, undeniably created powerful enemies along the way.
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
And this brings us directly to his revolutionary approach to knowledge, what we now commonly call the Socratic method.
Right. So how did his approach differ from what came before?
Well, earlier Greek philosophers, figures like Thales and Anaximander and Anaxagoras, the pre-Socratics, they focused primarily on what the Greeks called physis, nature, natural phenomena. They speculated about the origins of the cosmos, the fundamental elements of the universe, what existed under the earth and above the heaven. Their concerns were mainly cosmological, metaphysical.
Looking outward.
Exactly. Socrates, however, marked a truly significant departure, a turn inward. He famously shifted the philosophical focus away from the external world and squarely onto human affairs. His core concerns were ethical questions. What is virtue? What is justice? What is piety? How should one live? Understanding the human soul, the psyche. And his ultimate aim was profoundly practical. He wanted to make people better citizens, to improve their character, their moral understanding, their grasp of what constitutes a good and examined life.
So he wasn't looking at stars or the elements. He was looking straight at us, at human behavior, ethics, how we live our lives day to day. That's a huge shift in focus for philosophy.
It really was revolutionary.
It's like turning the telescope around and focusing it inward on the human condition. He saw himself, as he says, dedicated to the service of God by urging everyone to attend to himself and to his virtue. He wanted to improve everyone, young and old alike, which, ironically, is exactly what led some people to accuse him of corrupting them rather than improving them.
It's a deep irony. And the primary tool for this radical shift, this inward turn, was his unique method of disputation or dialectic, the Socratic method.
Okay, so what did that actually involve? How did it work?
Well, it wasn't about winning an argument through clever rhetoric, which is what the sophists often specialized in. They were more concerned with persuasive speaking, effective argumentation, sometimes regardless of the actual truth. Socrates' dialectic was different. It was a rigorous process of asking questions, relentlessly probing assumptions, exposing contradictions in reasoning, getting down to the foundations of belief.
How'd he start?
He usually start with a seemingly simple question about a concept everyone thought they understood, like, what is justice, or what is piety, or what is courage? Then, through a series of careful follow-up questions, he would guide conversation partner, step by step, to uncover the flaws or inconsistencies in their own initial definition or beliefs. The goal wasn't to humiliate them, though it often felt that way, I imagine, but to lead them towards a deeper understanding, or, at the very least, to that crucial awareness of their own ignorance on the topic, that state of aporia or confusion.
So it was like an intellectual journey of self-discovery, often uncomfortable, but ultimately illuminating.
That's a great way to put it. Yes, often uncomfortable, but always aimed at illumination.
And he did all this while famously avoiding jargon, right? Speaking in incredibly simple terms, using everyday analogies, real-world examples to make these abstract concepts relatable.
Absolutely. He says himself in the apology that his way of speaking, his elocution, wasn't polished. He admits he's never appeared in a court of law before his trial, so they must pardon his unforensic way of speaking. He emphasized that his style was purely about speaking truth, not about crafting persuasive speeches or clever arguments designed to win over a jury or impress an audience.
Just get to the core of the issue.
Exactly. Expose the truth, or the lack of understanding of it. This direct, unvarnished style, rooted in everyday conversation, made you approachable, but also deeply challenging.
Which brings us to the gadfly idea.
Yes, the famous gadfly analogy. He used this term to describe himself in the apology. He saw himself as a gift, literally, from the gods, specifically assigned to sting the lazy Athenian horse, meaning the state, the city of Athens, into action and self-improvement.
Like a horse that needs prodding to get moving.
Precisely. He argued that the state, for all its glory, was large and noble, but also sluggish, prone to complacency. It needed to be constantly awakened, stimulated, provoked into examining itself. He felt it was his divine duty, his mission from the God, to stir his fellow citizens to examine their lives, their values, to care more for their souls and for truth than they did for wealth or reputation or power.
And this self-perception ties directly into another really fascinating and unique aspect of his life, his divine sign or daemon. Tell us about that.
Ah, the daimonion. Yes, this divine sign is truly unique and maybe one of the most enigmatic aspects of Socrates. He described it as an inner voice, a kind of premonition or intuition, maybe like a spiritual guide, but it only ever told him what not to do.
Only what not to do, never told him what to do.
Never positive commands, only negative cautions. It was a warning sign telling him to refrain from a certain action or warning him off a particular course. It never directed him towards action.
That's specific. Any examples?
Yes, he claimed, for instance, that it reportedly prevented him from engaging directly in political life. He states in the apology that he only ever spoke in private, never venturing into public political assemblies. He believed his daemon would have stopped him if he had tried. He recounts a couple of specific instances where this inner voice stopped him once from becoming a politician, another time from acting illegally during the rule of the 30 tyrants.
So it was like a powerful, almost spiritual internal compass that consistently guided his choices, often making him defy conventional wisdom or even state orders.
That seems to be how he experienced it. It suggests a really powerful internal moral compass.
This raises an important question then. How much of his conviction, his unwavering commitment to his philosophical mission, do you think was rooted in this deeply personal, almost spiritual guidance?
That's a fantastic question and hard to answer definitively. The demon wasn't a positive command, which is a crucial distinction, as you noted. It was a negative check, a caution. It seemed to function by allowing him to discern actions, or perhaps morally wrong for him to undertake. It's a fascinating look into his internal compass and how it guided his external life. It really set him apart, even from his contemporaries. People often compare it to a highly developed moral conscience, or maybe even a kind of supernatural intuition, acting as his personal divine safeguard.
Did his accusers mention this demon?
Yes, he explicitly mentions it in the apology, calling it the divinity Miletus ridicules in his indictment. This suggests his accusers couldn't comprehend it, or perhaps they found this claim of personal divine guidance subversive, even blasphemous. It fed into the charge of introducing new divinities.
And his refusal to act sometimes, like when the 30 tyrants ordered him and others to arrest Liam of Salamis, an innocent man?
Exactly, that's a key example. The 30 ordered him and 4 others to bring Leon for execution. The others went, but Socrates simply refused and went home, fully expecting he might be killed for his defiance. Luckily, the 30 fell from power shortly after. It showed his consistent, unwavering obedience to this inner voice, to his conscience, even if it meant risking his life or defying this state. It demonstrates a remarkable level of integrity and spiritual independence.
And it was precisely this unconventional life, this relentless questioning of authority and common beliefs, and this belief in a personal divine sign that ultimately led to his downfall, didn't it? To his famous trial.
It certainly all contributed. He was already a well-known figure, sometimes mocked, sometimes admired, but definitely a polarizing presence in Athens. He had made powerful enemies through decades of his philosophical activities.
So, what were the actual charges brought against him at the trial?
Okay, the main public accusation was multifaceted and quite cleverly crafted to hit on long-standing suspicions. Firstly, he was charged as an evildoer and a curious person, searching into things under the earth and above the heaven.
That sounds like the old Aristophanes caricature, right? The natural philosopher.
Exactly. It was an old smear, directly reflecting the lampooning he received decades earlier in the clouds, where he was portrayed as this out-of-touch natural philosopher, doing absurd scientific inquiries. The charge also stated he was making the worse appear the better cause, and teaching all this to others.
The sophist accusation again. Twisting arguments.
Precisely. That was a common accusation leveled against sophists, that they use rhetorical tricks to manipulate arguments, make weak points seem strong. Socrates vehemently denied this, insisting his method was about uncovering truth, not winning debates. But the most serious charge, the one carrying the death penalty, was religious. Not worshiping the gods the state worshipped, but introducing other new divinities.
And that points directly at the daemon.
Yes, it was explicitly aimed at his divine sign, or daemon. It implied impiety, maybe even atheism, which was a capital offense in Athens. It suggested he was undermining the city's religious foundations.
And while those were the formal charges on paper, the source material makes it clear there was likely a real ground of hostility running much deeper, tied into the politics of the time.
Absolutely. You have to remember the context. Athens had only recently emerged from the brutal, short-lived rule of the 30 tyrants. This was an oligarchic group that had overthrown the democracy, leading to violence, executions, and civil strife.
And Socrates was linked to them somehow.
He was perceived to be connected to this aristocratic, anti-democratic party. Particularly figures like Critias and Charmides, both prominent members of the 30, had in fact been associates of Socrates, perhaps even students in their youth. Now, Socrates himself resisted their illegal actions, as we mentioned with Leon of Salamis, and he even defied their orders not to teach. But that association lingered powerfully in the public mind, fueling immense suspicion and resentment after the democracy was restored.
And the charge of corrupting the young.
That played a huge role. The idea was that his questioning undermined traditional values and authority, and people pointed to figures like Critias and Alcibiades, another controversial figure associated with Socrates, as evidence of his bad influence. Many prominent figures who turned against the democratic state had been in his circle at some point, so the belief spread that he was somehow responsible for their actions.
And who were the accusers bringing the case?
There were three main accusers. Anytus, a powerful, respected democratic politician who apparently had personal grievances against Socrates. Meletus, a rather obscure poet who likely represented the offended cultural or religious establishment. And Lycon, a rhetorician, perhaps representing the professional speakers Socrates often challenged. Together, they effectively represented different segments of Athenian society that Socrates had probably alienated over the years through his questioning and his unconventional ways. It was definitely a politically charged moment.
So, facing these serious charges, potentially facing death, how did Socrates defend himself? Plato's Apology gives us a detailed account, right?
It does. And what's truly remarkable about the trial, as Plato depicts it, is Socrates' unwavering defense and his profound commitment to his principles. He famously refused to engage in the common pleading tactics of the time.
Like what? What did defendants usually do?
It was common practice for defendants to bring their weeping wife and children to court, to lament their fate, to beg the jury for mercy, basically to elicit pity. Socrates explicitly refused to do this. He found such emotional displays shameful, unpious, and frankly, beneath a man of his age and his philosophical standing.
He thought it was disrespectful to the process.
Yes. He argued that it was the jury's duty to administer justice according to the law and the evidence, not to be swayed by emotional appeals or personal favors. This choice alone spoke volumes about his character and his absolute integrity.
Absolutely. He wasn't just defending himself against the charges, he was defending his entire way of life, wasn't he? His whole philosophical mission. He chose integrity over survival, which is, well, it's a pretty powerful lesson for all of us, I think, no matter what field you're in.
It really is.
It's a reminder that even when faced with immense pressure, Maybe upholding your core values, your mission, can be more impactful than just seeking self-preservation or taking the easy way out.
And his core argument was precisely that. He argued he wasn't corrupting Athens at all, but actually doing the state an immense service, a divine service, in fact. He reiterated his belief that he was a gift from the gods, sent to urge citizens to care for their souls, for virtue, for truth, more than they cared for wealth, reputation, power, or even life itself. He steadfastly maintained his mission was to make men better.
And he made it clear he wasn't going to stop, right? Even if they acquitted him.
Oh, absolutely. He made an incredibly powerful, almost defiant statement about his commitment, one that echoes through the centuries. He declared that he would never cease from the practice and teaching of philosophy, exhorting anyone whom I meet. He famously stated that he would rather obey God and philosophize than obey the court and stop. He prioritized the command of God as he saw it, the mission to examine himself and others over any command from the state or the jury. Death was preferable to abandoning his philosophical life.
He saw himself as a good citizen, a patriot even.
Yes, he explicitly calls himself a good man and true lover of his country, despite the accusations. His primary duty, he felt, was to fulfill this philosopher's mission of searching into himself and others. Avoiding death was not his priority.
This wasn't arrogance then, but just an unshakable conviction.
That's how it comes across in Plato, an unshakable conviction in his divine mission and the absolute supremacy of truth and virtue over all else.
So after this incredible, principled, and let's face it, utterly unconventional defense, what was the outcome? What did the jury decide?
Despite his powerful defense, or perhaps partly because of its unconventional, uncompromising nature, Socrates was found guilty by a majority vote. The initial vote, according to Plato, was 280 to 220. So a majority, but maybe not overwhelming, a difference of 60 votes out of 500 jurors.
Okay, so found guilty, then what happens? Sentencing.
Right. In the Athenian system, after a guilty verdict, both the prosecution and the defense could propose a penalty, and the jury would choose between the two proposals. The prosecution, led by Miletus, proposed the death penalty.
And Socrates, what did he propose as his alternative punishment? Exile, a fine.
This is where he becomes even more provocative. Socrates, in response, considered what he deserved. He argued that since he had spent his life benefiting Athens by urging virtue, the appropriate penalty, or rather reward, should be free meals for life in the Prytaneum.
Free meals, like an Olympic hero.
Exactly. The Prytaneum was like the city hall, and receiving free maintenance there was the highest civic honor, usually reserved for Olympic victors or major public benefactors. He argued, quite seriously it seems, that he had done Athens a greater service than any athlete by constantly challenging citizens to improve their souls.
Wow. That must have gone down well with the jury.
You can imagine. He clearly refused to acknowledge any guilt. He explicitly rejected alternatives like imprisonment or a large fine, which he said he couldn't afford anyway. He also rejected exile, arguing he'd just continue philosophizing wherever he went, annoying people there too, and besides, the unexamined life is not worth living. His counterproposal, this demand for honors instead of punishment, almost certainly angered the jury. They likely saw it as supreme arrogance and defiance.
So the second vote on the penalty.
The second vote was much more decisive. He was condemned to death by a larger majority, reportedly 360 votes for death versus only 140 for his proposal, which wasn't really a penalty. His provocative stance sealed his fate.
And his perspective on death itself in the lead up to his execution by drinking hemlock. That's one of the most profound and famous aspects of his legacy, isn't it? He seemed utterly unafraid.
He really did. Remarkable composure.
What was it about his philosophy, his way of thinking, that allowed him to face death with such equanimity, such calm?
It really goes back to his core beliefs about knowledge, virtue, and the soul. For Socrates, fearing death was fundamentally irrational. Why? Because it meant claiming to know something about which we are actually ignorant. Nobody knows for sure what death is. He considered death in two possible ways, logically, and found neither of them to be an evil.
What were the two possibilities?
Okay, first, maybe death is like a deep, dreamless sleep, a complete annihilation of consciousness, an oblivion from which one never awakens. If that's the case, he argued, it's not bad at all. In fact, he considered it a great gain, a perfectly tranquil state, maybe like the best possible night's rest, free from all troubles.
Okay, that's one possibility.
Yeah.
And the other?
The other possibility is that death is not an end, but a transition, a journey of the soul to another world, an afterlife. If that's the case, he reasoned, then it's also potentially wonderful. He mused about the possibility of meeting and conversing with the great thinkers, poets, and heroes of the past. People like Homer, Hesiod, Odysseus, or even other figures unjustly condemned, like Palamedes. He could continue his search for knowledge and wisdom there, questioning everyone.
So either way, nothing to fear.
Exactly. Either it's peaceful oblivion, which isn't bad, or it's a continuation of his philosophical quest in a better place, which is good. So logically, there was no reason to fear it. He argued strongly that to fear death is actually an instance of false wisdom, is tending to an evil, when in fact we don't know that at all. It's precisely the kind of pretense of knowledge he spent his whole life combating.
And underlying all this was his conviction about virtue.
Absolutely central. He fundamentally believed that no evil can happen to a good man, either in life or after death. For Socrates, the only real harm was harm to the soul, which comes from acting unjustly or viciously. Living justly and virtuously was paramount. Physical harm, even death, couldn't touch the core of a good person's soul. He famously stated that injustice is worse than death. Committing injustice harms your soul, while suffering injustice, even death, doesn't necessarily.
So his philosophy didn't just give him intellectual arguments against fearing death, it gave him a deep-seated moral foundation for facing it calmly.
I think that's exactly right. It taught him to prioritize the integrity of his soul, his commitment to virtue and truth above all else, including his physical survival.
This raises an important question, though. How did his philosophy prepare him for death, not just intellectually, but perhaps emotionally? It's one thing to argue it, another to face it.
That's true.
What's truly fascinating here is that unwavering belief in his moral compass, in doing good, even when facing a death sentence. That allowed him to maintain such composure, such integrity, right up until the very end when he drank the hemlock.
And interestingly, he even interpreted the fact that his daemon, his divine sign, didn't intervene to stop the trial or the verdict as a sign that death was not an evil for him. Perhaps it was even a good thing, a release, a timely transition.
Wow. He saw the silence of his inner voice as confirmation.
That's how Plato portrays it in the Apology, yes. It reinforced his philosophical conclusion that death was not something to be feared or avoided at the cost of his principles.
Okay, so now, as we transition to his enduring legacy, we absolutely have to circle back to something you mentioned earlier, the Plato problem.
Yes, the challenge of Plato's portrayal. It's crucial. Much of what we know, and indeed what the world thinks it knows about Socrates, comes almost entirely from Plato's dialogues. And these are, without question, incredibly influential works, foundational texts for Western philosophy. But it's vital to remember they are also literary art. They are dramatic works. They aren't court transcripts or, objective historical biographies.
Plato was a brilliant writer and philosopher himself.
Exactly. And he often used the character of Socrates as a mouthpiece, a vehicle, for his own developing philosophical ideas. This becomes especially apparent in his later dialogues, where the Socrates character argues for complex metaphysical doctrines like the theory of forms that many scholars believe are purely Platonic, not ideas the historical Socrates ever held.
So separating the two is really difficult.
It's incredibly difficult, and it's the subject of intense, ongoing scholarly debate. How much is the historical Socrates, the actual man, his specific teachings, and how much is the Platonic Socrates, a literary creation embodying Plato's own philosophical ideals? Our source material even explicitly states something like, the character of Plato's Socrates is a consistent and extraordinarily interesting character, far beyond the power of most men to invent. But I think Plato could have invented him. That really highlights the core of the debate.
It really does. It's like trying to understand a historical figure only through a really, really good but heavily stylized biopic movie. You get the essence, you get the drama, the impact maybe, but how much is creative license, how much is interpretation, and how much is strictly factual?
That's a great analogy.
And this has huge implications, doesn't it, for how we understand historical figures in general. It underscores the challenge of relying on primary sources that are already filtered through someone else's interpretation, maybe even their artistic goals.
Absolutely. It reminds us to always approach historical accounts, even contemporary ones, with a critical eye, always asking about the author's perspective, their potential biases, the lens through which we're viewing the past.
Okay, so acknowledging that challenge, that Platonic filter, what are the core Socratic contributions that shine through that have had such a massive impact?
Well, despite the filter, certain core ideas strongly associated with Socrates, largely conveyed through Plato's powerful portrayal, have had an unparalleled impact on Western thought. One absolutely central idea is the strong connection he forged between knowledge and virtue. Socrates, as Plato presents him, believed passionately that knowledge is most valuable when understood and applied. He posited that virtue, or our broad excellence of character, moral goodness, is fundamentally linked to knowledge. Wisdom is virtue, in a sense.
The radical idea being that if you truly know what is good, you will automatically do what is good.
Exactly. That's the core of the Socratic ethical intellectualism. The idea is that people act wrongly, not out of willful malice, fundamentally, but out of ignorance. They mistake something else, pleasure, wealth, power, for the true good. This is often summarized in the phrase, no one sins willingly or no one does wrong knowingly. Because if you truly understood what was genuinely good and truly beneficial for your soul in the long run, you would naturally choose it.
Which implies that moral education is all about gaining knowledge, about understanding the good.
Fundamentally, yes. For Socrates, or at least the Platonic Socrates, the path to becoming a better person is through philosophical inquiry, through gaining self-knowledge, and a true understanding of concepts like justice, courage, and the good itself.
And this leads directly to that huge emphasis on self-examination, self-improvement.
Precisely. While the exact phrase, the unexamined life is not worth living, might be Plato's summary in the Apology, it perfectly encapsulates Socrates' constant call for self-inquiry, for relentless questioning of oneself and one's own beliefs. He believed that people absolutely need to scrutinize their own beliefs, their values, their actions, if they want to lead a truly meaningful and virtuous human life.
It's not a one-time thing, right? It's an ongoing process.
Absolutely, a rigorous ongoing process of reflection, asking the tough questions of yourself and others, being willing, crucially, to admit when your beliefs are contradictory or unfounded. It's a lifelong commitment to intellectual and moral honesty.
And the tool for this was the dialectic.
Yes, the dialectic method was the primary engine for this self-examination. This method of rigorous questioning, demanding logical consistency, defining terms carefully, it became a foundational tool for all subsequent philosophical inquiry in the West. It moved thinking beyond mere opinion, beyond unexamined belief or tradition. It wasn't just about winning an argument. It was about systematically dissecting arguments, exposing inconsistencies, defining concepts precisely, and hopefully reaching a more coherent, logically sound understanding of truth.
So it fostered critical thinking.
Deeply. It encouraged critical thinking and the pursuit of knowledge for its own sake, purely for understanding, rather than for personal gain or rhetorical victory. Indeed, our source material notes that some have argued that philosophy itself might even be defined as the sum total of those inquiries that can be pursued by Plato's methods, which really underscores the enduring power and centrality of the Socratic approach.
So what's the core takeaway from this? Even though we see Socrates largely through Plato's creative philosophical filter, these core ideas, the vital importance of self-knowledge, the link between virtue and understanding, the power of relentless, critical questioning these, became the absolute bedrock of Western philosophy.
That's right.
It's like he laid the essential groundwork, the foundation, for countless thinkers who came after him, fundamentally shaping the way we approach ethics, knowledge, and inquiry.
His influence is truly immense, and it extended far beyond the immediate circle of his students like Plato or Xenophon. He profoundly impacted many subsequent philosophical schools.
Look at the Stoics.
Yes, definitely the Stoics. They heavily embraced his emphasis on virtue as the sole good, on self-control, reason, and achieving independence from external circumstances and material goods. They adopted his idea of living in accordance with reason and nature, cultivating inner peace and resilience regardless of external fortune or hardship. That echoes Socrates' own composure in the face of adversity and death.
And the Cynics, too. They seem quite Socratic in some ways.
The Cynics as well, yes. They took elements of his asceticism, his apparent disregard for conventional social norms and material possessions, to an extreme. They prioritized virtue and self-sufficiency above all else, often through a radical detachment from societal expectations, which certainly has Socratic roots.
And it goes even further, doesn't it? There's this strong, maybe surprising to some, connection drawn between Socrates and early Christian thought.
Absolutely. Our source material explicitly points to a close connection to Christianity in terms of seeking moral perfection and inner spiritual guidance. Many early Christian thinkers and later philosophers through the ages saw significant parallels. They compared Socrates' daemon, that inner divine voice guiding him away from wrong actions, to the Christian concept of conscience, or maybe even the guiding voices heard by figures like Joan of Arc.
So they saw him as a kind of precursor.
In some ways, yes. He was seen by some as a kind of pagan saint or a proto-Christian martyr, a Puritan avant la lettre, as the source puts it. Someone who embraced a spiritual understanding that transcended worldly concerns, institutions, and even life itself. His intense focus on the soul, on cultivating inner virtue, his emphasis on moral perfection as the highest goal, and certainly his willingness to die for his principles and beliefs. All of this resonated deeply with Christian thought and ethics.
It's really incredible how his ideas, even filtered through centuries of interpretation and the creative genius of Plato, continue to resonate so powerfully. They still shape our understanding of ethics, of knowledge, of what it means to live a truly good, examined life.
It is remarkable.
His story, in a way, reminds us that sometimes the most influential figures are the ones who, ironically, refuse to write down their own thoughts. They force us to engage with their ideas through the active interpretations of those they inspired.
That's a very insightful point. His life, his method, his trial, and his death, they served as this incredibly powerful living testament to his principles. It transformed him into a timeless symbol of intellectual integrity, moral courage, and the unwavering pursuit of truth. His refusal to compromise his beliefs, even facing a death sentence, really solidified his place as one of history's most profound moral exemplars.
So we've journeyed through the elusive nature of Socrates, his unique street-level method of inquiry, his steadfast principles during that dramatic trial, and his profound, even if often mediated through Plato, legacy. For Socrates, thinking critically, examining one's own beliefs, that was a lifelong mission. It was more important than life itself. So here's a thought for you listening. In our modern world, where information streams at us constantly, 247, where different narratives compete fiercely for our attention, what might Socrates say about the unexamined information we consume every day?
That's a really pertinent question.
How can applying his method, that relentless questioning, that humility in acknowledging what we don't know, how can that help you navigate the complexities of today? How can it help you truly become well-informed rather than just, well-fed by data streams without real understanding?
That's a powerful thought to leave with everyone. The Socratic method isn't just some historical curiosity locked away in textbooks. It's a living, vital tool for achieving clarity, for critical thinking in our incredibly complex world.
Definitely something to ponder.
And if you're curious to dive even deeper into this yourself, we highly, highly recommend exploring Plato's Apology. And maybe some of the other early Socratic dialogues, like Crito or Euthyphro. They are truly compelling reads. They offer profound insights, seemingly directly from the ancient world, and will give you an even richer, more nuanced understanding of this extraordinary and still elusive man.